When it comes to maintaining shared resources, human systems frequently collapse. International climate agreements stall for decades. Traffic overwhelms highway grids. Common pool resources, like fisheries, are harvested to the point of total depletion. Economic theory provides a specific prediction for these failures. It assumes that individuals act as rational, selfish agents. Under this model, the math suggests that people will always contribute exactly zero to the public good to maximize their own utility. The empirical data, however, tells a different story. In single, isolated interactions, people routinely defy the logic of pure selfishness. They donate to public television, they volunteer. And in laboratory experiments, first-time participants regularly contribute substantial portions of their personal wealth to a shared group. This creates a structural paradox. The evidence proves that humans possess an instinct for initial cooperation. Yet, when placed in repeated interactions over time, that cooperation almost universally collapses. Experimental economists isolate this paradox using a controlled model called the voluntary contribution mechanism, or the public goods game. The setup is simple. 4 players are placed into a group, and each is given a starting endowment of 20 tokens. Every round, players secretly choose how many tokens to keep and how many to contribute to a central public pot. Any tokens placed in that pot multiply in value, usually by 40 to 50%, and then the total is distributed equally back to all 4 players, regardless of who contributed what. This math creates a free rider strategy. Because the pot is divided equally, the individual who keeps their entire starting endowment while reaping the rewards of the other 3 players' contributions will guarantee themselves the highest personal wealth. However, the social optimum requires the opposite. If all 4 players resist the urge to hoard and commit their entire endowment to the center, the multiplier effect maximizes the total wealth of the entire group. When humans play this game, they start near that social optimum, contributing roughly half of their tokens. But as the game repeats for a second, third, and fourth round, those contributions steadily drop. The nature of this decay follows a trajectory that challenges the idea of simple learning. The data points to a specific tension in how players perceive each other's intentions. In 1988, James Andreoni designed an experiment to test the 2 standard theories for why this cooperation fails. The first is the strategy hypothesis. This argues that players cooperate early on purely to build a false reputation, tricking the group into investing heavily so they can hoard the tokens in the final rounds. The second is the learning hypothesis. This proposes that participants are simply confused by the math at first, and slowly adopt the free rider strategy as they understand the game. Andreoni tested these by running 2 parallel games. One involved a fixed group of partners playing 10 consecutive rounds. The other used a group of strangers who were randomly reshuffled every single round, making it impossible to build a reputation or plan a strategic backstab. Both groups showed the same decay over time, but the anonymous reshuffled strangers actually contributed more than the fixed partners. This result broke the standard predictions. If reputation or confusion were the primary drivers, the strangers' contributions should have been lower, and the decay should have looked different. Because both standard explanations failed the test, researchers began looking at the underlying psychological preferences of the players. A 2001 study by Fischbacher, Gechter, and Fair identified a specific behavioral type that describes most participants, the conditional cooperator. A conditional cooperator is someone whose willingness to contribute is directly tied to what they expect the rest of the group to do. They match cooperation with cooperation. Proving why decay occurs in these groups requires measuring not just what people do, but what they expect others to do. In 2010, researchers modified the game to financially incentivize participants to accurately state their beliefs about their peers' contributions. If a player guessed correctly, they earned extra money, providing a truthful measurement of their internal expectations. This chart shows the raw data from that experiment. The solid black diamonds track actual contributions across 10 periods, showing the familiar drop toward zero. Behavioral economics treats an action as the product of an individual's baseline preference multiplied by their belief about the group. With both variables recorded, the mechanism of the collapse is quantifiable. When we overlay the player's stated expectations, the white diamonds, onto the contribution chart, the relationship is clear. Both metrics fall simultaneously. Every single round, actual contributions sit consistently below the player's own expectations of what the group will give. This gap defines the imperfect cooperator. It is a self-serving bias. These individuals want to match the group's cooperation, but they shave off a slight margin, contributing just slightly less than they expect others to give to avoid being the biggest loser. Researchers used regression models to isolate how this slight margin of imperfection cascades round by round. This table tracks how players form their beliefs. Model 2 highlights the strongest variable driving an expectation for the current round, the actual contributions of the rest of the group from the round prior. The coefficient of 0.394 is highly significant. It proves that a player's current belief is strictly anchored to the group's past behavior. The bias operates like a ratchet. A player sees the group's previous contribution, lowers their expectation for the next round slightly, and then undercontributes against that new lowered expectation. This second regression table explains the final action. The high statistical significance across the belief row confirms that this newly lowered expectation dictates how many tokens the player puts into the pot. The tragedy is a result of simple math. Imperfect conditional cooperation multiplied by steadily falling beliefs equals structural collapse. The universal free-riding seen at the end of these games is a self-fulfilling prophecy of pessimistic expectations. This reveals a cruel irony. A group comprised entirely of people willing to cooperate will still drive themselves into total free-riding because of their own slight self-serving bias. Applied to the original game, we see the spiral in action. Players underestimate the next round and hold back a few tokens. That margin compounds. Round by round, the center pot starves until no one contributes anything at all. This architecture governs massive real-world systems. It explains why open-source software projects run out of maintainers and why international climate treaties fracture. As soon as participants expect others to under-contribute, the decay begins. Solving these cooperation problems requires designing institutional mechanisms that artificially sustain positive beliefs, rather than relying on human altruism. However, there is a scientific limitation to these findings. The mathematical clarity of these preferences exists within a controlled laboratory setting. In 2007, Stephen Levitt and John List argued that the artificial constraints of a laboratory can inadvertently inflate prosocial behavior. They identified the scrutiny effect. Knowing you are being observed alters the reciprocity and trust you are willing to display, compared to how you would act in absolute anonymity. Validating these mechanics requires testing them in natural field environments, like a sports card convention, where subjects have real financial stakes and are completely unaware. The lab provides the math of how cooperation decays through falling beliefs. Applying that math to save the public good requires proving it in the unscripted reality.